Code monkey, get up, get coffee. Code monkey, go to job. Code monkey, have boring meeting with boring manager Rob. Rob say code monkey very diligent, but his output stink. His code not functional or elegant. What do code monkey think? Code monkey think maybe manager wanna write goddamn login page himself. Code monkey not say it out loud. Code monkey not crazy, just proud. Code monkey like Fritos. Code monkey like Tab and Mountain Dew. Code monkey very simple man with big warm fuzzy secret heart. Code monkey like you. Code monkey like you.
Warm greetings, Code Monkeys and fellow VEDSies, and welcome back to CodedLockFilms. So, you know that thing I usually do at the beginning of every Disney Direct DVD review where I spend a few minutes kind of summarizing my thoughts on the original before we jump into the sequel? Yeah, that's not gonna happen this time. See, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is not like other Disney movies, and my thoughts on it are not easily summarized. It is a very flawed movie, but rather fascinatingly so. I rather like this movie on the whole, but at the end of the day, it's merely a pretty good movie. Which is a real shame, because it could have been more than just a good movie. It could have been great, possibly one of Disney's greatest ever. But it wasn't, and that's mostly due to the Disney brand and its somewhat restrictive nature. Let me explain. Disney is rather unique as a company. Setting aside their many subsidiaries, Disney as a movie-making entity is known for a very particular type of movie. This type of movie is often referred to as the Disney formula. The Disney formula has changed a lot over the years, but what has remained consistent is that the Disney formula refers to that certain style, that raw look, emotion, and just general feeling that make a project unmistakably a Disney movie. The Disney formula is meant to provide filmmakers with a solid framework upon which to build a film. Think of it like building a house. The foundation and the wooden frame are the Disney formula, and then the drywall and plumbing and interior decorating, that stuff is the specifics of each individual film. The downside of the Disney formula is that it can feel very restrictive. Like, you may be able to decorate that house however you want, use whatever colors of paint you want to use, but if you want that house to have an attached garage and the architect didn't include one in the plans, well, sorry bucko, you ain't getting that attached garage. I may be overextending the metaphor here. Anyway, the formula has changed and evolved over the years, but there have been some definite growing pains along the way. And one of those growing pains was The Hunchback of Notre Dame. There was a period of time during the 90s where you can see a definite desire by Disney filmmakers to kind of branch out and get away from the Disney formula. This desire is very evident in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and in many ways, it feels like two totally different movies attempting to occupy the same screen.
The very eyes of Notre Dame. Pour the wine and cut the cheese.
It's I alone whom you can trust in this whole city. I am your only friend.
Achilles, sit.
Hey, whoa!
Oh!
Frodo's nose is long and he wears a truss.
This burning desire.
She will discover guy. You're one heck of a guy.
Yeah, this movie has issues. Or, to put it more accurately, it has one really big and prominent issue. Let's talk about tone. pretty much everything that drags this movie down and holds it back relates to the film's tonal inconsistencies. Tone, for anyone unaware, is basically the mood or feeling that a work of storytelling is attempting to instill in the audience. Comedy often has a lighthearted or irreverent tone. Historical biopics generally have a serious tone. Whodunits have a mysterious and nerve-wracking tone, so on and so forth. Now, it is not impossible to blend tones or shift between tones. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, for example, is a really great blend of mystery and comedy. But tonal shifting, i.e. when the mood of a piece changes, needs to be done with a purpose. Oftentimes, that purpose is to either raise the stakes of the story or to deepen character connections. Or both. Mulan, for example, has a long stretch of time where the tone is very lighthearted, beginning just before Mulan gets to the military training camp and all the way up through A Girl Worth Fighting For. The lighthearted tone allows the characters to build some friendly camaraderie in a low-stakes environment, and they get so caught up in just having fun and being buddies that they almost seem to forget what they're actually there to do. They're marching to battle, all having fun, fantasizing about what it'll be like to be big war heroes, and then... bam! All at once, the rug is pulled out from underneath them. In an instant, and for the first time, they become fully aware that war is not fun or pretty, and there's nothing at all romantic about it. Real people are dying, and the Huns are a very real threat. So you idiots had better start taking this shit seriously real fast. Good, effective use of the tonal shift. The key thing to remember about all of this is that tonal shifts are jarring to the viewer, especially when the story shifts between conflicting tones. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is constantly marred by this tonal flip-flopping. This problem is at its most prominent during the Siege of Notre Dame. We come directly off of this, and then we shift to this. This is not to say that the Hunchback of Notre Dame never uses tonal shifts effectively. Towards the beginning, for instance, the tone is lighthearted as we get our introduction to Quasimodo, and we find that he is a kind, demure soul. Then all of a sudden, Frollo shows up, and the tone abruptly shifts to something much darker. The audience is thus startled in the same way that Quasimodo is, and the darker tone gives us darker insight into his character. Turns out he's demure and passive because he's a victim of psychological abuse. He's humble and grounded because his self-esteem has been deliberately destroyed by Frollo. Good use of the tone flip. It's more gradual and less jarring, except for the moment where it needs to be jarring. Another good example of tonal shifting happens during the Feast of Fools. When the sequence begins, everything is bouncy, bright, and whimsical, as is appropriate for the festival, but there's also a sort of vaguely off-kilter undertone to everything, which reflects Quasimodo's uncertainty. When the crowd discovers that Quasi's face is not a mask but his actual face, the tension thickens palpably as both he and the audience fear for how the crowd will respond. Then the whimsy and joy return as Clopin takes control of the situation and shifts the mood of the crowd to a positive one. Bards, man. Then, abruptly, the crowd turns cruel, and the happiness of the scene comes to a crashing halt, shifting to dark and menacing. It's genuinely shocking, and you feel the trauma that Quasimodo is feeling because the movie has used tonal shifting effectively to put the viewer in the same mindset as the protagonist. Where it stops working is when, just as we've been punched in the gut with how cruel the world is to Quasimodo, and Esmeralda has gotten the viewer all fired up and pissed off, all of a sudden we go back to wacky slapstick goofiness for the scene when Esmeralda outruns the soldiers. Then the second that's over, we go back to Quasi being sad, but because we've just dealt with that tonal whiplash, all of a sudden his trauma falls flat because the movie hasn't used tonal shifting effectively. The broad overall point here is that rapid shifts in tone are jarring to the viewer, which again is fine if it's done intentionally, but if you change the tone too often, then the audience has trouble knowing how to feel and it takes them out of the experience. With all of that in mind, let us ask this question. how would one go about fixing the tonal problems in The Hunchback of Notre Dame? Well, one method would be to go for the full-on Disney effect. This would honestly be a bad idea in my opinion, but let's roll with the premise. First, you'd have to rework the music into something less opera and more Broadway, and then you'd have to tone down some of the story's darker elements into something more child-friendly. Mainly, you'd need to rework Frollo as an antagonist. This means no creepy old pervert stuff, no obsession with purging sin, and yes, no hellfire. Now, removing the themes of lust and sin from Frollo basically turns him into a less foppish version of Radcliffe from Pocahontas, but it is doable. Again, understand that I think this would be the wrong approach. I'm not saying that the hypothetical, super Disney-fied version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame would be anywhere near as good as the alternative. I'm just saying that it could be done if you wanted to, and the end result would be much more tonally consistent. It wouldn't be as interesting, of course, but the point I'm trying to make here is that The Hunchback of Notre Dame is not, as some people have suggested, inherently incompatible with the Disney formula. So if one does not wish to make the super kid-friendly version of this story, then how would one go about making adjustments in the other direction? Well, it's tempting to say just get rid of the gargoyles, but not only is that too easy, it's also a bit disingenuous. The gargoyles are a symptom of the problem, not a problem in and of themselves. The fact is, Quasimodo needs someone to bounce off of in order to establish his character towards the beginning of the film, and the gargoyles work well for that purpose. So how do we fix the gargoyles? Well, towards the beginning of the movie, it's sort of implied that the gargoyles are basically Quasi's imaginary friends since they turn to immobile stone whenever anyone else besides Quasi is around. But by the end of the movie, a number of things have happened that outright confirm that yes, they are actually coming alive via some sort of magic. If I were in charge of fixing the gargoyles, I would lean into the idea that they are all in Quasi's head. First of all, Hugo. You know, the Jason Alexander gargoyle who's sexually attracted to goats? Yeah, he's pretty much unsalvageable. Scrap that one entirely. The other two are basically fine, just tone down their behavior a little bit and make them more like archetypes than caricatures, if that makes sense. Then, you use the gargoyles to enhance Quasimodo's character development. Towards the beginning of the movie, have him talk to them pretty much constantly whenever he's alone. He asks them for advice, bounces ideas off of them, that sort of thing. Then, as he gains more and more confidence and becomes more self-actualized, have him rely on them less and less. Then, when he's chained up to prevent him from saving Esmeralda, don't have him literally chained up. Make it more metaphorical. Have him just sitting alone in the bell tower, wrestling with his desire to go to her aid, despite Frollo having ordered him to stay put. Remember, he's been conditioned from birth to unquestioningly accept Frollo's authority. That kind of psychological programming doesn't just go away overnight. Have him raving to himself about how he has to go help her, but he can't because his master told him not to, and just going back and forth and back and forth. And then he turns to the gargoyles and begs them to tell him what to do. And then they apologize and tell him that this is not a decision that they can make for him. He has to decide for himself. Then they turn to stone and they stay that way for the rest of the movie. Quasimodo can no longer use them as his crutch. He must act on his own. Sounds pretty good, right? That alone would fix a lot of the tonal problems. Beyond that, you just need to tweak a few little things here and there, adjust a couple of music cues, tone down the slapstick, and boom! You've got a much better, more absorbing, and more consistent movie. Or at least I think so. So, where does all of this leave us? Well, like I said, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is indeed a flawed movie, but it is most certainly not a bad one. At its worst moments, it's irritating and unfunny, pretty much a quintessential example of how easy it is for Disney to miss the mark when the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. But at its best, it's big, grand, operatic, and one of the most dramatic and moving things the studio has ever produced. So how do you judge the worth of something that uneven. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a good movie, but it could have been a great movie if they had only been given more time to iron out a few little details here and there and smooth out some of the rougher parts. It has the makings of an ultimate recommendation in it, but it gets held back from that by the tonal inconsistencies and its general identity confusion. So the basic question is this: if this movie was very nearly an ultimate recommendation, down how many pegs does it get knocked by its flaws? The gargoyles I can generally live with the exception of Hugo the goat-banging wonder. That was actually super hard to ignore. The main issue is, of course, the tone. Because of those tonal issues, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is not a movie I find myself watching terribly frequently. It's something that I'll put on every once in a while when I find myself in the mood for it, but I do not feel personally compelled to own it, and I probably wouldn't buy it on DVD or Blu-ray unless I found it on sale. With all that in mind, I can pretty confidently call The Hunchback of Notre Dame worth renting. Though I would definitely give the soundtrack CD a higher rating than that. With the exception of the gargoyle song, the music in this movie is nothing short of incredible. I've also heard some really good things about the musical. Haven't seen it myself, but from what I understand, it takes the subject matter a lot more seriously. So if you're looking for a more mature take on the material, then that seems like it might be a good bet. Or alternatively, you could just read the book, which I haven't, but as I understand it, it's pretty freaking dark. So there you go. And now that we've gotten this video out of the way, we can move on to the main event. But first, I'd like to offer up a little appetizer to the main course, a palate cleanser, if you will. Before we talk about The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, I have a special Disney ripoff collection video for you, none other than UAV Entertainment's classic, The Secret of the Hunchback. And oh boy, what a secret it is. So until next time, Code Monkeys and fellow VEDSies, I will see you tomorrow. If you want the house to have an attached garage feeling that a work of fiction is attempting to instill in allowed some more time. Duh.